Hey guys, Scott here, and I want to talk about the concept of uncounterable versus overpowered in Dead by Daylight. And then I want to kind of segue that into the discussion of whether or not the game should be balanced for the 1v1 experience or the 1v4 experience. Because both sides have merits and it's kind of an interesting topic. So first off, I think using Oni is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. In a recent video that I made, I asked the question of whether or not Oni was counterable in a chase. In my experience, there is very little survivors can do to stay alive longer than a few seconds once an Oni sees them with his power active. Naturally, some people responded with anger, asking why I think a killer is overpowered so soon, or asking why I want all killers to be nerfed, or stuff like that. The thing is, those people are not really understanding the difference between uncounterable and overpowered. I think the old Legion is a perfect example of the differences. For those unaware, the old version of Legion could basically guarantee a down on a survivor in a static amount of time without a single ounce of counterplay. The survivor's skill was irrelevant as their death was a certainty. However, Old Legion was not overpowered. He still took that static amount of time to down these survivors, and because of that, he could still lose the game overall. So in that scenario, you had a killer that was both uncounterable yet not overpowered. I feel the same with the PTB version of the Oni so far. To me, he seems uncounterable in a chase, yet his start, especially against a very good team, can be detrimentally slow. So again, you have a killer that's uncounterable and yet not overpowered. Uncounterable kind of refers to the 1v1 aspect of the game, and overpowered refers directly to the 1v4 aspect of the game. The thing is, both of these views of the game have their own merits, and I wanted to talk about them. To start, generally, killer mains would want the game balanced around the 1v4 aspect. Survivor mains would want the game balanced around the 1v1, and people that view the game objectively with both sides in mind want it balanced around both sides equally. But which side is more correct? Well, let's look at the draw of each viewpoint. The 1v4 point of view looks at Dead by Daylight as a whole. It basically aims to have every game between evenly matched players end in 2 kills and 2 escapes, or a metric the devs have decided to be a balanced match. Disregarding the fact that the emblem system often, interprets 2 kills and 2 escapes as a loss for the killer, this is something the developers have aimed for as a balancing target, which makes sense, considering it splits things evenly down the middle if both sides are even. Even if 2 kills and 2 escapes were not the metric for a balanced match, looking at the game through a 1v4 lens means that you want as much as possible for the average game to approach whatever that metric is, and for it to be reliably possible to do so, no matter the cost. The 1v4 viewpoint is one of black and white, and basically just raw competitive balance. Viewing the game as a 1v4 is important because the killer is not playing a 1v1. Even if a survivor's experience isn't great, the game must sacrifice that experience in order for the match be plausibly winnable for the killer. Overall, people that believe solely in the 1v4 method of balancing tend to be killer-sided, as they are, in fact, constantly going against 4 separate people. And they figure the game should sacrifice whatever it needs to in order to make sure games between similarly matched players end in roughly the same way. Ideally, this would mean bringing the power of the weaker killers up to the level of the stronger killers. Now, in terms of pure black and white balance, viewing the game as a 1v4 is the clear correct choice. However, there is also the 1v1 aspect of the game, and now the 1v1 aspect is generally more closely followed by survivor players, because to them, the only important part of the game is, in fact, a 1v1. Every hour a survivor puts into the game, all their experience and time goes into one thing only: evading the killer. Evading the killer is basically the only thing survivors can do that actually has a learning curve. Everything else they do is basically just a glorified holding of a button. Actually, it's not glorified, that is exactly what they do. So, it would make sense that survivors would want all of the time spent learning how to evade killers to mean something. The problem is, if you do not balance things around the 1v1 chase as well, you begin to ignore all of the time survivors have spent learning the game. I bring up Old Legion again because he is the epitome of ignoring all skill. And what happened with the Old Legion? Droves of survivors quit or just kept disconnecting against Legion because they felt that their time was wasted. They want to feel like the time that they put into the game means something. And when you have an uncounterable killer, they have no drive to continue playing the game because all of the time they spent into getting better suddenly becomes meaningless. And the more you solely balance for the 1v4 aspect and ignore the capability for a survivor to also be able to outplay the killer, the more survivors will stop playing, leading to longer and longer queues, and eventually leading to the death of the game. However, like in that example, when you start focusing on making the killer counterable, you start leaking right back into the 1v4 aspect of the game again, because maybe the fact that the killer is counterable now also makes him underpowered in the game as a whole. So basically, both sides of this argument are correct. looking at the game as a 1v4 is required to balance the game properly, but looking at the 1v1 individual chasing is also required to retain players and keep it fun. Ideally, I think like a round hillbilly is a perfect example of balancing correctly for both sides. His 1v4 is solid as he can pressure the entire map very fast, but his 1v1 is fair because most tiles grant some form of limited safety versus power. Now on the PTB, the Oni is not really overpowered because of his extremely slow start, but he's nearly impossible to invade once he does have his power, and that's the reason I think he needs a change. The Spirit is another example of not necessarily overpowered in the 1v4 aspect, but nearly uncounterable in the 1v1 aspect, and both of these things I feel are not really good for the game. The more that I think about it, almost all of the 1v4 balance issues come down to map design and the speed of the game, and the 1v1 balance issues come down to killer design. And the thing is, both of them need to be addressed equally, and both have perfectly valid complaints and concerns. Either way, because both sides have a good argument, I don't want this video to convince you of anything, because I kind of believe both sides are right. I just want it to maybe make some people see the merits of the other side more, which would, I think, promote a healthier community overall and an overall better attitude towards balancing the game, and less arguing among people. But that is it, guys. I just wanted to make a quick video about that, clarify some stuff. And I'd love to hear what you think, like what side is more important, or are they equally important? I'm of the opinion that they're equally important, but I am curious. This is more of a discussion video, less me trying to convince you of something. But that is it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.